Future SIL tried to convince my fiancée to postpone our wedding because she thought our celebration was too embarrassing for the family. She publicly accused me of robbing her brother, but then her own parents pulled funding for her wedding after seeing how she treated us. I always knew planning a wedding would be stressful, but I never expected my future SIL to be the biggest source of it. When my fiancée and I got engaged after 5 years together, we had a clear vision for our wedding. We wanted something small and intimate, just a gathering of our closest family and friends. Nothing over the top, nothing flashy, just a celebration that reflected our love for each other. We set a reasonable budget, found a beautiful outdoor venue, and planned a cozy reception with good food, good music, and a warm, personal atmosphere. To us, it wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about making the day meaningful and special in a way that felt right. But apparently, not everyone saw it that way. Enter my fiancée's sister. She's always been someone who cares a lot about appearances. Big, grand gestures? That's her thing. She thrives on luxury, loves anything flashy, and believes that bigger is always better. So when she heard about our wedding plans, she didn't even try to hide her disappointment. At first, it was just small, passive-aggressive comments. She'd offhandedly mention how small our venue was, how simple our decorations sounded, or how basic our menu was. I brushed it off, assuming she was just expressing her opinion. But it didn't stop there. Soon, she started talking to my fiancé in private, trying to convince him that we should postpone the wedding so we could do it right. According to her, we were settling for less and should wait until we could afford something more impressive. In her mind, our modest plans were a huge mistake, something that would embarrass the family. She genuinely believed that because she had always envisioned a big, glamorous wedding for her brother, he should put off marrying me until we could make that happen. I only found out about this when my fiancé casually mentioned that he was feeling pressured to reconsider. At first, I laughed, thinking he was joking. But when he told me about his sister's reasoning, I was floored. How was our wedding any of her business? Why did she think her opinion mattered more than ours? It wasn't like we were asking her to pay for anything or even play a big role in the planning. My fiancé reassured me that he had no intention of changing our plans, but the fact that she even tried to interfere made my blood boil. It felt incredibly disrespectful, like she thought her version of his wedding was more important than what he and I actually wanted. And unfortunately, she wasn't done yet. The real tipping point came at a family gathering. I was chatting with some relatives when she suddenly walked up to me, completely unprovoked, and started going off. She accused me of robbing her brother of the wedding he deserved. She said I was being selfish, that I was cheapening the family name by insisting on a small wedding, and that it was embarrassing. She made it sound like I was forcing my fiancé into a sad, low-budget event against his will. I was so shocked I didn't even know how to respond at first. It was like she had been bottling up all this frustration and finally decided to explode right in front of everyone. I could feel all eyes on us. Some people looked uncomfortable, others seemed just as stunned as I was. Thankfully, my fiancé stepped in quickly and shut her down. He made it clear that our wedding was our decision and nobody else's. He told her that if she couldn't respect that, then maybe she didn't need to be part of the celebration at all. I could see how furious she was, but she finally backed off, at least in public. But karma has a funny way of working things out. Not long after our wedding, my sister-in-law's own wedding plans fell apart in the most ironic way possible. She had been engaged for about a year, planning the kind of extravagant wedding you'd see in a movie, a massive ballroom venue, custom designer outfits, a guest list in the hundreds, over-the-top decorations. It was exactly the kind of wedding she had been pushing my fiancé and me to have. But what she didn't realize was that the majority of her wedding funds weren't actually coming from her or her fiancé. Her parents were footing most of the bill. And after seeing how she treated us, they had second thoughts. Her parents had been quietly observing her behavior throughout our entire wedding planning process. They saw everything. They saw how she tried to manipulate and pressure my fiancé into changing our plans. They saw how she dismissed and belittled the wedding we wanted, acting like it was beneath the family name. And most of all, they saw how she confronted me publicly, accusing me of ruining her brother's chance at a real wedding. That was the final straw for them. Her parents had always believed in fairness. They had no issue helping their children financially, but they weren't about to reward entitled, selfish behavior. To them, money wasn't just something to hand over without thought. It was a reflection of their support, of what they stood behind. And after seeing how she treated us, they didn't feel right spending a fortune on her wedding when she had been so cruel about ours. So, when it came time to finalize payments for her big, extravagant wedding, they made a decision. They decided they weren't comfortable footing the bill for an event when their daughter had acted so entitled and disrespectful. Instead of continuing to fund the over-the-top spectacle she had planned, they quietly pulled their financial support. She didn't find out right away. She only realized what had happened when she went to confirm some final payments with vendors and saw that the money wasn't there. Panic set in immediately. She called her parents, completely frantic, demanding to know what was going on. And that's when they told her, straight up, they weren't paying for her wedding anymore. She was stunned. At first, she thought there had to be some kind of mistake. But when they explained their reasons, how she had treated us, how she had made our wedding planning miserable, how she had acted entitled and disrespectful, she realized they were serious. They weren't budging. They had made up their minds. She was livid. Absolutely furious. She threw a tantrum, yelling about how it wasn't fair, how she had dreamed of this wedding for years, how she deserved their financial support. She begged, pleaded, even tried to guilt trip them, but it didn't work. They stood firm, refusing to give in to her demands. That's when the real panic set in. Without their help, she had no way to pay for the wedding she had planned. She tried everything she could to get the money on her own. She attempted to take out loans, but her credit wasn't great, so she couldn't get approved for the amount she needed. She turned to her fiancé's family, hoping they would step in, but they weren't willing to contribute beyond a small amount. She even tried to guilt trip my fiancé into giving her money, but he wasn't having it. After everything she put us through, there was no way he was going to fund the very wedding she had used as a weapon against us. In the end, she had no choice but to downsize. A lot. The grand ballroom venue she had booked? Gone. The designer dress she had been so excited about? She had to settle for something much simpler. The extravagant decorations and the huge guest list? Cut significantly. The entire wedding had to be reworked into something far more modest than she had originally planned. She still had a wedding, but it was nowhere near the spectacle she had envisioned. And from what I heard, she was absolutely bitter about it the entire time. She couldn't stand that she had to settle for a wedding that was far closer to the one she had mocked us for having. And now, as I look back on everything, I can't help but wonder, was I wrong for not trying to mend things earlier? Should I have tried harder to smooth things over before it got to this point? Or was this just the natural consequence of her own actions? Maybe if she had been kinder, more understanding, and less focused on controlling things that weren't hers to control, she wouldn't have ended up in this situation. Maybe, just maybe, this was the lesson she needed to learn all along. Update 1. A couple of days after my original post, my sister-in-law tried to reach out. But it wasn't an apology. Not even close. Instead, she wanted to justify herself, to make excuses for her behavior, as if there was some logical reason behind everything she had done. She claimed she wasn't trying to ruin our wedding, she was just looking out for her brother and wanted the best for him. As if that somehow made everything okay. I wasn't buying it. Not for a second. If she truly cared about her brother's happiness, she would have respected his choices from the start instead of constantly pushing her own vision onto our wedding. This wasn't about love or concern. It was about control. It was about her thinking she knew best, that her opinion mattered more than ours, that her idea of the perfect wedding was the only one worth considering. She had spent months undermining us, making backhanded comments, and treating our plans like they weren't good enough. That wasn't love, that was entitlement. My fiancé was just as fed up. He had already put his foot down before, making it crystal clear that he wasn't interested in entertaining her complaints anymore. And he wasn't about to start now. He told her straight up that she had overstepped, that she had disrespected both of us, and that we weren't going to waste any more time arguing about it. Our wedding was done. It had been beautiful, intimate, and exactly what we wanted. And we weren't going to let her bitterness take anything away from that. But of course, she wasn't ready to let it go. When she realized my fiancé wasn't going to engage with her, she turned to their parents instead, hoping they'd be more sympathetic. She tried to guilt trip them, painting herself as the victim. She told them they had been too harsh, that pulling their financial support for her wedding was unfair and cruel. She acted like she had been wronged, like she was the one suffering, completely ignoring the fact that she had brought all of this onto herself. Her parents, to their credit, stood firm. They weren't about to be manipulated by crocodile tears. They calmly told her that their decision wasn't made out of anger or punishment, it was made out of principle. They had seen the way she treated us. They had seen her selfishness, her entitlement, her complete disregard for anyone's feelings but her own. And they simply couldn't, in good conscience, reward that kind of behavior. They reminded her that she had plenty of chances to be supportive. Plenty of opportunities to respect our choices and act with kindness. But instead, she had chosen to be judgmental, manipulative, and downright rude. And now, she was dealing with the consequences of her own decisions. What's crazy is that even after all of this, she still saw herself as the victim. In her mind, she hadn't done anything wrong. She genuinely believed she was just being a caring sister, looking out for her brother, and she couldn't understand why people weren't taking her side. It was almost like she had convinced herself that she was the only one who knew what was best, and the rest of us were just being unreasonable. But the reality was, she hadn't been looking out for my fiancé, she had been trying to control him. She hadn't been concerned about his happiness, she had been concerned about her own vision of what his wedding should be. And when things didn't go her way, she played the victim instead of taking a hard look at her own actions. In a last-ditch attempt to shift the narrative, she started reaching out to extended family members, trying to turn them against us. She spun the story to make herself look like the one who had been wronged. According to her, we had overreacted, shut her out over a difference of opinion, and punished her for simply speaking her mind. She framed it as if we had been unfair, as if we had blown everything out of proportion just because she had a different perspective. But at that point, most of the family had already seen her behavior firsthand. They had watched as she tried to take over our wedding planning, disregarded our choices, and threw a tantrum when she didn't get her way. It wasn't just our word against hers, people had witnessed it. And they weren't falling for her act. While a few relatives were sympathetic and felt bad that her wedding had to be scaled down, the majority saw the situation for what it really was. Of course, there were still a couple of people who thought we should be the ones to reach out and be the bigger people. They suggested that since our wedding had already happened and her extravagant plans had fallen through, there was no harm in trying to mend things. They thought that letting go of the drama and making peace would be the right thing to do. But honestly, I wasn't feeling it. Not after everything she had put us through. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about respect. About boundaries. About the fact that she had never once acknowledged how hurtful her actions were. If she had come to us with genuine remorse, if she had owned up to her behavior and admitted that she was wrong, maybe things would have been different. But she didn't. She never apologized. She never took responsibility. Instead, she acted like the victim, as if she had been unfairly treated, instead of recognizing that she was dealing with the natural consequences of her own choices. And making peace isn't just about sweeping things under the rug and pretending they never happened. Real reconciliation requires accountability. It requires someone to recognize that they've hurt others and to make an effort to fix it. And as long as she refused to do that, I didn't see any reason to chase after a relationship she clearly didn't care enough to repair herself. So no, I wasn't going to be the one to fix things. Not this time. And honestly, I was okay with that. Update 2. Things took a dramatic turn when my sister-in-law's fiancé called off the wedding. I don't think anyone saw it coming, not even her. One day, she was still desperately trying to salvage her over-the-top wedding plans, doing everything she could to make her dream wedding happen despite all the setbacks. And then, just like that, everything came crashing down. Apparently, all the financial stress and her relentless obsession with having a grand, extravagant wedding had started putting a serious strain on their relationship. Her fiancé had been growing increasingly frustrated, feeling like he was no longer an important part of the equation. What was supposed to be a celebration of love had turned into a spectacle, an event that seemed to matter more to her than the actual marriage itself. It wasn't about their future together anymore, it was about the image she wanted to project. She was fixated on the designer dress, the luxury venue, the hundreds of guests, and all the expensive details that came with it. But what she failed to realize was that a wedding is just one day, a marriage is supposed to be for life. And somewhere along the way, she completely lost sight of what truly mattered. From what I heard, her fiancé had been hesitant for a while but didn't want to hurt her. He tried to be understanding. He tried to compromise. I honestly didn't expect things to escalate this much. I thought that after some time, she'd calm down, reflect on everything, and eventually accept the situation for what it was. But instead of taking a step back and reevaluating her actions, she doubled down on her victim narrative. She refused to take any responsibility and instead painted herself as someone who had been wronged by everyone around her. To make matters worse, she took to social media to air out all her grievances in the most dramatic way possible. She made a long, emotional post about how her family turned their backs on her and how she was left completely alone in her time of need. She left out every crucial detail, of course. She didn't mention how she had tried to control our wedding. She didn't mention how she had belittled our choices, manipulated my fiancé, or treated our parents like an unlimited ATM. She didn't mention how her fiancé had tried to work with her and how she refused to budge. Instead, she framed it as though she had been cruelly abandoned by the people she trusted the most. And the wildest part? Some people actually bought it. A few distant relatives and acquaintances, who didn't know the full story, started commenting with messages of support, telling her she deserved better and that they couldn't believe her family would betray her like that. She lapped it up, responding with vague comments about how she never expected this and just wanted to be happy. But she didn't stop there. She started sharing cryptic, passive-aggressive posts, things like some people show their true colors when you need them most and it's sad when family lets you down. It was clear she was fishing for sympathy, and unfortunately, some people gave it to her without even questioning the full story. It was frustrating to watch because we knew the truth. We knew she wasn't some abandoned, heartbroken woman just trying to find her way. She was someone who had created this mess entirely on her own and was now desperate to shift the blame onto anyone but herself. The rest of us, the ones who actually knew what had gone down, just shook our heads. At this point, it wasn't even surprising anymore. She wasn't interested in the truth, she just wanted sympathy. And if that meant twisting the story to make herself look like the victim, then that's exactly what she was going to do. I briefly considered addressing it, maybe even posting my own side of the story, but in the end, I decided against it. The people who mattered already knew the truth. And the people who blindly believed her sob story? They weren't worth my energy. I wasn't going to get dragged into a social media war just to defend myself against someone who refused to see reality. If she wanted to play the victim, that was on her. But I wasn't going to be part of her performance. Update 3. My sister-in-law has gone full no contact with almost everyone. After everything that happened, she decided to move out of state, claiming she needed a fresh start. She packed up her things, quit her job, and left without much of a goodbye. She cut off nearly all communication with her family, barely speaking to anyone anymore, not even her parents. It's like she completely erased herself from our lives, and honestly, I think that's exactly what she wanted. She lost both her wedding and her relationship, and instead of reflecting on what went wrong, she chose to run from it. It's easier to blame everyone else than to admit she might have played a role in her own downfall. In her mind, she's still the victim, the woman who was unfairly treated, abandoned by her family, and left to rebuild on her own. But the reality is, she created this mess for herself. She made her choices, disregarded everyone's feelings but her own, and now she's dealing with the natural consequences of that behavior. My husband hasn't spoken to her since she left. And at this point, he has no intention of reaching out. He spent too long dealing with her entitlement and selfishness, and he's done. There's nothing left to say. He gave her multiple chances to be respectful, to support us, to be a decent sister. She chose not to. That was her decision, and now she's living with the consequences. He told me once that he never wanted it to come to this, but after everything, he just doesn't have the energy to keep trying with someone who refuses to change. As for her parents, they're disappointed, but they've also come to a point where they're done enabling her behavior. They stood by her for years, supporting her in every way possible, but watching her try to sabotage our wedding was their breaking point. They realized she wasn't just a little spoiled, she was completely unwilling to take responsibility for her actions. They told us they still love her, but they're not going to keep making excuses for her behavior. If she ever wants a relationship with them again, she's going to have to be the one to fix it. And that means owning up to what she did instead of pretending she was some helpless victim. And us? Well, our wedding went off beautifully. Exactly how we planned it. Small, intimate, and full of love. It was everything we wanted, and we couldn't be happier. Despite all the drama, all the stress, and all the unnecessary interference, we got the wedding we dreamed of. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters. We look back on that day with nothing but happiness, knowing that we stayed true to ourselves and didn't let anyone dictate how we celebrated our love. And honestly, that feels like the best possible outcome. This entire situation really opened my eyes to how entitlement and arrogance can completely backfire on a person. My sister-in-law was so convinced that everything had to go her way, no matter how many people she upset in the process. She genuinely believed that her opinions mattered more than anyone else's, that her vision was superior, and that she had the right to control how other people celebrated their own milestones. But the truth is, life doesn't work like that. You can't treat people like puppets, forcing them to bend to your will, and expect to come out unscathed. Actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences hit harder than expected. She spent months trying to undermine us, belittling our wedding choices, and acting as if we were making a huge mistake by not going all out with some grand, extravagant event. When she didn't get her way, she resorted to guilt trips, manipulation, and outright disrespect. And when her parents finally decided they weren't going to reward her behavior by funding her own dream wedding, she spiraled. Instead of taking a step back and realizing she had gone too far, she doubled down. She blamed everyone but herself. She refused to acknowledge how her attitude and actions had led to her own downfall. Even when her fiancé finally had enough and called off their wedding, she still didn't stop to reflect. Instead of recognizing that her obsession with a picture-perfect wedding had driven a wedge between her and the person she was supposed to be spending her life with, she turned the entire situation into a pity party for herself. She cast herself as the victim, convinced that the world had turned against her, when in reality, she had simply pushed too many people away with her entitlement. At this point, I honestly don't know if my sister-in-law will ever take accountability for what happened. Maybe one day, she'll look back and realize just how much damage she caused not just to us, but to herself. Maybe she'll come to terms with the fact that she had every opportunity to be kind, to be supportive, to be happy for her brother and me, and she chose not to. Maybe she'll understand that the choices she made, every comment, every tantrum, every demand led her exactly where she is now. Or maybe she won't. Maybe she'll always see herself as the person who was wronged instead of the person who caused the chaos. And honestly, that's no longer my problem. At the end of the day, I've moved on. We've all moved on. My husband and I got the wedding we dreamed of, surrounded by people who truly loved and supported us. We didn't let her drama ruin what was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of our lives. And that, more than anything, is what truly matters. To everyone who followed along with this entire wild ride, thank you. Your support, advice, and kind words have meant so much to me. Reading your comments reminded me that we weren't crazy for standing our ground, and it made this whole ordeal a little easier to deal with. I appreciate every single one of you. Wishing you all happiness, love, and most importantly drama-free weddings.